will start sharing my screen. Is it okay? This is the screen?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So, first of all, thank you all the organizing team for inviting me and all the people attending this digital meeting. The talk I will present you today will bring me back to a work I made last spring for a workshop. It was called Techniques Matter. Maybe some of you were there. I will just make the same intervention but slightly expanded and updated. As you can see from the title, probably you can figure out that the theme of the talk will be the idea of looking at ecology and ecological problem from the point of view of atmosphere as at the same time a living space that we share with other being and we build up with the other being. Instead of looking at ecology through the paradigm, the idea of land, that's something more connected to solid and ownership and stability, etc. And I will try to connect this kind of topic with the visual field, the visual art that are my own field, trying to think how visual technique and particular visual art could help us to make sense of this atmospheric ecology. Let's start from something that is a general truth, really evident. That is the idea that air is invisible. I wanted to quote a kind of not really known work by Gunther Anders, the German philosopher, Die Molucchische Catacomb. That was a novel published after his death, where one of the characters says, and I'm reading the quote, "Positive is invisible, you don't feel the air when you breathe. You acknowledge its value only when it's brought away. You understand it is necessary only when it lacks. The materialism is indeed a theory of the invisible." So what the character says is something really, really simple and evident, is that we live within air, we need air to live, but most of the time we do not perceive air and more generally atmosphere. They are a positive environment, something that allows us to keep on living, but it's only where there is a negative event, an accident, a problem, that we really understand its presence and its necessity. This is a kind of a general statement that we can keep in mind just about thinking about Anthropocene and this environmental crisis that all of a sudden make us aware of the importance of this positive environment that is matter, but is not perceived usually. I was making this reflection a few months ago while we were in a lockdown situation, and I said air is no more invisible in May 2020 because of the virus. Suddenly we were worried by air, by the impact, the emission, the individual emission of each one of us, because of the possibility of contaminating other people. I was reading at the time researchers who were trying to measure, and maybe they are still doing so, the air emission of people that are sick in order to manage, to control the epidemic evolution. And you can see a picture that visualizes this kind of thing on one side of the screen. At the same time, we were not just worried about individual ejections, but also about more like social and collective emission. This impact that we all together have on the atmosphere we inhabit. That was for example, in the northern Italy, there were some researchers, as you can see from the other picture on the screen, they were trying to make sense of the high mortality rate in the northern Italy during the first phase of the coronavirus crisis. They were trying to make sense of this high rate of mortality through the idea that trying to connect this to the data about the high pollution situation in the northern Italy. At the same time, as most of you, I think, know, there were on the social network a lot of statement about how the air is cleaner when we stop like moving around and producing, etc., etc. So it was also, these events also made atmosphere perceptible also from that point of view. So now we are in autumn 2020, and we have, at least in France, other political events that let atmosphere become visible and its necessity. I don't know if it is the same in other countries, but here in France we have a lot of demonstration against the 5G. And the reason that mobilize people, that push people in the street, are their preoccupation about the energetic pollution generated by 5G, so the impact, the carbon impact of this kind of technologies, but also another atmospheric problem that make air matter all of a sudden is the electromagnetic field generated by this kind of communication. We can say, as I stated at the beginning, that all the history of all the entire notion of Anthropocene is really connected to this appearance of the importance of atmosphere in a negative situation where atmosphere become dangerous, become a threat. As you probably know, the idea of Anthropocene that now is really widespread and really successful comes from research works made by someone who was working in geochemistry of atmosphere, Paul Crutzen, and also other fellow scholars. And the starting point of this idea was the connection between the human impact on the atmosphere and the geological evolution. So they were like trying to measure the impact of human activity through the data about carbon emission. It is, Anthropocene for me is like a ghost story. It's like a zombie scenario, at least as it's presented by Crutzen. That is, I'm trying to explain it more clearly. Crutzen, when he talks about Anthropocene, he talks about the rise of thermo-industrial society. For him, the beginning of Anthropocene date back to England in the 18th century, when we started to exploit coal and steam, and it is the first moment where the impact of human society on atmosphere, according to him, becomes really, really important. And from this situation, we can say that we started with coal, but with oil as well, etc., etc. In the context of the modernist development and in the thermo-industrial society, we started to dig out dead matter, like solid and heavy dead matter from underground, and then burn them in order to accelerate the population, the production, the communication, etc. And when we burned them, we sent this kind of dead matter, we sent them into the sky, into the atmosphere, and they became a kind of ghostly presence that threatened us from above. It's kind of a zombie scenario when that lead us to a situation that, in a very comic way, I compare to the one in Asterix and Obelix comics, where you have these characters that are really worried about the possibility that the sky will fall upon their head. And I think the problem of Anthropocene, seen from this atmospheric perspective, is kind of similar. As I said, it's not like a random moment, the one that Croson chose for the beginning of Anthropocene, but it is rather a moment where the capitalist mode of production really took place and started to modify our society, at least in the occidental part of the world. He picked up as the beginning point of beginning the James Watt invention of the steam machine, and it is more or less the beginning of the factory model. It is why this is the reason why some scholar like Jason Moore prefer to talk about Capitalocene instead of Anthropocene. The responsibility is not the whole mankind responsibility, but it's more the responsibility, the fault of a certain system, like socio-economical system, that is the capitalist one. It was the same time, it was the same context, I would say, that was at the center, at the core of the work of someone who, like Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, who said, it's really famous, it's a really famous statement, all that is solid melts into air. It was in the manifesto, and they were talking about bourgeois and capitalist society, and talking about the dynamics of constant revolution, change in this kind of context, the innovation, permanent innovation and mobility. I would say that this slogan could also describe really well the concrete metabolism working behind the capitalist production of transport, and communication, and object, etc. That is the transformation of solid matter into something that is really airy and atmospheric, but then could become dangerous. This was a more like general introduction of the concept that are really important for me, and I wanted to end up this moment with a short summary about three atmospheric issues that I really am concerned about. I would say that the problem connected to this atmospheric situation are at least, we can say that there are at least three. The first one, and I wanted to quote the philosopher Timothy Morton, is that atmosphere is kind of fleeing hyper-object. That is something that is objective, that is an objective matter, but it's not subjective, it's not an invention, but it imply a space and a time that is really difficult to handle, to define, to manage. It is a little bit the problem of the viral situation as well. The second thing connected to this one is something that I'm taking from Emanuele Coccia, an Italian philosopher working on plants and vegetal life, that says that atmosphere is basically a shared living space made up and modified by all the living beings taking part to it, and that somehow it is also a reason why it is an hyper-object, that the two things are connected. And the third one is the idea that this kind of situation need to be understood within the idea of Maurizio Ferraris of documentality. What is documentality according to Maurizio Ferraris? Maurizio Ferraris said that there are like natural and material existence of things, like atmospheric thing, and then we have social existence of thing. And the social existence of thing that is somehow separated from the actual concrete existence need to be to go through a media. It need to be mediated. It need to be recorded. It need to be registered. The documental existence of thing is their possibility of being in a social context. That's a challenge for atmosphere, according to my point of view. I will move on to the real subject, the matter of my talk, that will take place against this background. And the matter of this talk would be the possibility of making sense of atmospheric field, as I said, through visual techniques. I will try to follow two lines of reflection. The first line of reflection would be working on cinematic art that is able to record or try to record traces of atmosphere or atmospheric events. We can have like scientific data. We can have scientific way of visualizing atmosphere. I'm more interested in more sensible anesthetical means of recording and exposing atmosphere. And we will see that in order to show atmosphere, these kind of artistic attempts need to somehow deactivate the natural surface of the image. There is a trouble at that point. And the second line will be more about visual techniques that inhabits atmosphere as a point of view, as a perspective. But it will become clear later on. The general assumption I wanted to put behind that is that cinema, that is like my field of reflection, could be understood in a general way as an atmospheric medium. It is different, like for example, from sculpture or writing, etc. We have two reasons. The first one is that since the beginning, since its inception, cinema was a mean of the industrial society. So it's a highly technical art, and it has an important carbon footprint. So we have atmospheric emission in cinematic activity. So this is a negative part. But the positive part, for me at least, is that cinema is a way of recording and making visible atmospheric and weather conditions. In order to make an image appear on the cinematic film, you need light, you need air, and it was really clear at the beginning of the cinema. As you can see from the picture in the screen, the first cinematic studio, the one from Edison Initiative, was a kind of mobile studio. It was, I would say that it's like a sunflower that was open and could rotate and trying to follow the right atmospheric condition to produce images. So let's go to the first example, first line of example that will show you a little bit different kind of artistic attempts to detect and show atmospheric events that are invisible. The first one is about the possibility to record and display atmospheric radiation. I wanted to mention the work of a Japanese filmmaker from the experimental field who is called Tomonari Nishikawa, who made this work called Sound of a Million Insects, Light of 1,000 Stars in 2014. He worked on the Fukushima site next to the power plant, and he used a 35mm film. He laid it down overnight where there wasn't light, and the pattern that you can see on the film are generated by the weak light of the star, but also by the radiation, the atomic radiation in the air, because as you might know, the chemistry of cinematic film do not react only to light, but also react to atomic radiation. That's why, for example, as you can see in the image on the left side, when they try to take photos in Chernobyl, you get this granular texture, this interference in the creation of the image. I will try to show you a really short excerpt from Nishikawa, a movie that is really quick. You can see it on Vimeo if you want. There is no sound, okay. So it's a experimental movie. I don't know if you are used to that, but it's a bit weird. You don't have really narration or character or anything like that. I will go back to my example. So this was one of the thing I'm interested in. Another example from the same year was 2014. Come from Quebec. The film is called The Quiet Zone, and it is interested in the situation of electrosensitive person. In this movie, you have a person who is witnessing their electrosensitivity. It is a kind of voice over, and then you have images. Picture images of the landscape. In this case, you don't have really a proper recording of an electromagnetic field. So there is those fields generated in atmosphere by intense communication through electronic means. But what do they do? They do basically they work on the processing, on the chemical processing of the image through a series of gestures. One of them called bleach etching, that decompose the matter of one of the layers of the chemistry, and they generate on the image a kind of interference, trouble, stain waves, as you can see, that are in dialogue or are kind of echo of the description, the witnessing in the voiceover that try to describe what does mean to live in electromagnetically polluted environment. I will try again to show you a really short excerpt of the film in order to understand a bit how does it work. So this is not recorded, but is added after the field recording of the images. And it's really, but it is a random phenomenon. You cannot really master the effect of bleach etching. So everything I'm showing you is accessible on internet, so you can see the whole film. And I move on to the third example I wanted to mention. It's a little bit different. It's still in the field of experimental movie, but we are talking about here. We are talking about digital image. The artist I wanted to mention here is Jacques Perconte. He's a French artist based in Paris who has been working on digital image for several years. His work on its experimental work on digital image drew on two different kind of gesture. The first one, he does a field recording with really deep optical field with using a long focal length, and he exploit the machine, the camera, to record invisible events in the atmospheric landscape. Let's say movement of air, like hot and cold air, or birds, bugs, etc., etc. Usually, when you record something through a digital camera, they try to optimize the background and get rid of all these minor events. But per cont try to keep them and record this kind of data that are usually absent. The second gesture is working on the program that exploit those data recorded and in order to display an image. He modified this kind of program that interact with the data, the memory he recorded on field, in order to create an interaction between the display and the memory that is not naturalist as we are used to. And I will show you straight away an example of his work. It is really interesting for me, at least. It was, I don't know if this is a movie he made in the Alps, and it doesn't want to work. No, okay, it's working. Let's see a few minutes of it. You can see, for example, birds flying across the screen that modify the image. Basically, this interaction between the material recording on field and then the exploitation of them by a program that has been modified by the author. You can see it online as well if you want to see it entirely. I'm finishing with this first line. I wanted to move on to something slightly different. So I was talking about making visible, making atmospheric phenomena visible through visual artistic work. And I will move toward another kind of subject. It was my second line. The second problem was using atmosphere as a point of view. What does it mean to watch from the atmosphere, living in the atmosphere? We can say that the modern history, the modern time, it's not just a time where we started polluting and having a strong impact on air, on atmosphere, but it was also a moment where we stopped looking at the atmosphere, the sky from below, and we started looking the earth, the ground from above. We have this really iconic picture of blue marble from the 70s when we saw the planet from the moon. There is an important essay by Ito Steyer I'm really fond of, who is like observing this kind of phenomena, this inversion in the point of view due to the evolution of transport and technologies, and also image capture technology. And the reflection I really love in Ito Steyer says that we were used to a linear perspective devices from the Renaissance that were optical system that they were made up in order to observe the external world with a distance, and to what can we say? And to control it, to build a global control of the environment from an external position. That was the dream of the linear perspective, according to Ethos Taylor. And this is something that changed, but it's not. We can say it is a radicalization of the same approach with another kind of perspective. It's a perspective from the air, from the atmosphere, whereas the linear perspective was an optical system from the ground, and as you can see in most of military aviation material, in overviews, in Google Maps, satellite view, it could be understood as Ethos Taylor says, this vertical perspective as another stage of the same attempt of watching the environment, our world from the outside, and trying to manage it in this disembodied, distant position. This is what we can see in a movie in a recent movie that for me is really interesting. It's really important, by someone who's called Eleanor Weber. The movie was called Il n'y aura plus de nuit, and it uses military footage from Middle East. You can see a military operation where you watch at the ground from the sky, and then in his movie, in her air movies, she tried to critically expose this kind of relationship between the gaze and the ground, the gaze and the environment, in a path toward an external domination. I don't know if you know Harun Farocki, but it's an operation really close to the one Harun Farocki used to make. So we have this vertical perspective that would lead to a relationship toward our environment that is a relationship of control, of exteriority, etc. But Ethos Taylor in her essays also talk about another kind of relationship to the environment from the atmosphere. That is what I'm really interested in. She calls it free fall, and this reflection would lead us toward the idea of a groundless ecology. That it's a little bit the center of my reflection. This idea of groundless ecology, that is an ecology that is not based on the idea of ground, the idea of land, the idea of soil. So that is something that could be unified, that could be managed, that is solid, that we can handle. But an ecology that is more based on atmosphere, as Emanuele Coccia would say, atmosphere, looking at it from the plant point of view, atmosphere is something that is much more unstable, that is unsettling, that is always ever changing, that we cannot really define, and it corresponds better to this mobile and tangled environment. It corresponds better to the needs and the horizon we are engaged in the environmental crisis. And really, I think that Emanuele Coccia's thoughts are close to Tim Ingold's also a reflection on weather world that mix up the soil, the sky, the solid, the liquid, and the air. What I wanted to say about that is if we want to explain to make sense of it from the point of view of visual art, we can say that it exists not only a vertical perspective, that is a perspective of an optical position of domination, of external disembodied domination on environment, but we can also find a position of a viewpoint from the atmosphere that is more close to what Itostel called being in free fall. Being in fall, being in the atmosphere without having a ground where we could land, without land. And I wanted to, that is something delinearized, multiple, unstable, whirling, etc., etc. For me, a good example of this kind of perspective in the artistic field is the work of a movie maker called Robert Fulton that come from the United States, and he was not only a movie maker, but he was also a pilot. So he used to shoot a lot of images from his plane, and he used to make a really particular portrait of environment, like the one in Keynote, as you can see, as you will see. His portrait of environment are really atmospheric portrait, where you have a portrait that is based on a stunning multiplication of images and point of view, based on a really rapid and dexterous editing. It's really a way of making an erratic and plural portrait of an environment that, for me, is really close to this idea of mixture and mobility and change connected to the atmospheric point of view or the effect of inhabiting atmosphere. I wanted to see you to show you a little excerpt of the work of Fulton, and then I will head toward my conclusion. So the film of Fulton's film is also available on internet if you wanted to see it there. So this kind of cinematic portrait of Machu Picchu zone in Latin America, made by Robert Fulton on a 16mm film, and I think it embodies quite well the idea of atmospheric point of view about environment. You have to imagine that there is a free jazz sounds on the image, and so we have also this influence on this kind of atmospheric work, and you have also it's the last influence we can mention about Robert Fulton, the martial art. I'm not quoting martial art in his education for a random reason, but because of this conclusion. In order to end up my talk, my presentation, I wanted to go back to a memory from the PhD period I spent in Grenoble. We held PhD workshop, and there was a fellow PhD student called Martin Givor who was studying the Chinese culture and was practicing Qi Gong. Maybe you know what Qi Gong is. For me, it was the first time I practiced Qi Gong, and one of the most important things in Qi Gong is coming to perceive the air, the atmosphere around, and its energy. We were practicing an exercise that's really simple. It was getting to feel the air field between our two hands. After 1 hour of practice, I was a little bit skeptical, but I started really feeling something. I started really thinking it's kind of something that was pulsating. It was really was a kind of energy. It was really, for me, it's an important memory. And I was thinking about all these kind of cinematic work through this memory. And I'm thinking about that as a possible Qi Gong cinema that could allow us to perceive on the image, not just in a bodily, a personal, interior situation, to perceive the atmospheric world we are living within, and maybe through this perception that is linked to the idea I was mentioning at the beginning of documentality, because it's not documentality, this bodily experience, but cinema maybe could fit in a documental frame. So with this atmospheric document, maybe we will be able to take care better of the atmospheric space we're inhabiting with other living beings. I thank you for your attention. I beg your pardon because for my English, I'm talking French all the day, and I'm not French, so it was an effort for me to give this talk.
Thank you so much, Jacopo, for the talk. And yeah, just maybe if everyone can put your questions in the chat, or if you want, I mean, you don't have to spell it out, but if you just have a question, please say, a question here in the chat so I can give you the floor. But maybe while everybody is gathering their thoughts, I wanted to ask the first question. I think I was really curious about the medium, so cinema being the atmospheric medium. But at the same time, you're talking about mediation as something that needs to happen for the atmosphere to enter the social context. But the moment that happens, it's never neutral, right? It's politicized. So because the videos that you showed really rendered atmosphere as very abstract. I mean, it maybe renders it as makes air matter in the sense that it's something, right? It is some kind of material. But we don't see whether this is a threat, whether this is a resource, where this is, I think, the Emmanuel Coche's definition of it's something that we all make up, all the living beings, by our respirations. That's also really beautiful. But these are all layers of interpretation that have to be put on this cinematic medium that kind of records atmosphere in this very abstract way.
Yes, I agree with you that it could be a problem in terms of political ecology. I mean, based on this image, because they do not say to us a clear discourse or clear concept about what atmosphere is and how we take part into atmosphere and what are the responsibility coming from that. Probably reading Emmanuel Cocha book would be more straightforward if you want to, if you see the scientific document about data of carbon pollution, etc. It would be a more as you can say, more rational and more direct. But the point for me is, what can we say? The ending point of my talk was really clear about what was somehow the purpose I wanted to figure out or to reach. It was more about experiencing and feeling atmosphere than explaining it. To be honest, I mean, for me, this idea of experiencing atmosphere through the body in Qi Gong practice, it's really close to idea. So atmosphere as an energy, as a presence. It is not really, we cannot really define or cannot really handle or describe. And it's really what we can see in those movies, or in particular the first series of movie. Atmosphere is something, a pulsation. It's an energy. It's a presence in those movies. It's kind of ghostly presence. And I think that this idea of living in atmospheric and groundless ecology leads us to take into our consideration, to pay attention to this presence that it's it's beyond the possibility of really explaining it or measuring it, etc., etc. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you. I think I just want to leave room for people to have a chance to ask questions.
I have a question. Can I ask it?
Yep, please just jump in.
Yeah, just I was very, very interested in your association of the cinematic and as an atmospheric medium. And I wanted to ask, in terms of the cinematic as a, the film as a more or less endangered medium, as in the sense that it's not only stop being produced, but it's very material conditions. It's also susceptible to the atmospheric conditions in a way.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask if, for example, not necessarily if there is any other interpretation that not makes us think of the celluloid, the film, but for example, the act of projecting cinema or the act of experiencing it.
I don't know if I understood well your question about analogic film. If I understood well. I mean, the part of the thing I showed you, it was about analogic movie and the material medium of the ancient cinema. It is not digital one, and it's really interesting because of because the extinction. We are in I don't know. In France, it's really strong, the sensation of being in a collapse scenario. We have this movement called collapsology, just like the science of collapse, we can also speak of a certain way of a collapse of a certain kind of cinema based on analogic media that is stopping to be produced, but. It's for me. It's something that is really interesting. Is the idea that the analogic film is something. It's a body. It's like a skin. So it's something that is breathing somehow with sensible to the atmosphere within which is put. That's a really strong image, I think, and that's why it's really important for me within an ecological reflection and visual art to take into account this kind of medium that could be compared easily to any other organic body. I think it's really within the movie I showed you, the one about electromagnetic field. It's really interesting because. This trying to make a parallel between the possibility of affecting and troubling the physical body and the possibility of affecting and troubling and interfering on a medial body. So this was the first thing I wanted to say, and the second thing is about, as you said, I kept in mind this idea of projection as an atmospherical event. That was a little bit what you were pointing at. In fact, we can say that even if the medium changed, the projections still remain almost the same with digital means, and it is an atmospheric event. So it's something that. Compared to our flat screen that we are all using now, the projection creates an atmospheric event, and to take place, the you have to take into account the light and the air, etc., etc. So I stopped to the artistic creation and not to the spectator side, if you can say so. But I would be really interested in developing this thing from the environment of reception and how they might make us sensible to the atmospheric, the air condition, etc.
Thank you. And I just maybe also wanted to bring in Desiree into this conversation because I think a lot of what you were talking about in terms of experience of the atmosphere, both the sort of Chinese cosmologies using the body as a kind of medium itself, right? Like as the sort of something that's porous enough that the experience of sort of interiority of our body as we're breathing the air or kind of being in the air, renders the atmosphere in some way. Whereas I think the Desiree's approach, which also uses affect and aesthetics in a way to expand our ability to interact or sort of engage with atmosphere, is much more about the surface and the boundary, or the meeting of the atmosphere, right? The sort of this phenomenological insight of sort of not talking about the interiority, not talking about the body as porous and part of the air, essentially, right? So I was wondering if you can sort of talk about these two approaches, or maybe Desiree can also comment if she's still with us.
Yeah, I'm still with you. There was just right now a little bit of a chaotic situation with a fire alarm, so I didn't hear the beginning of your question. I'm sorry. Speaking of atmospheres, but I think I got a little bit of. I can maybe also turn the video back on. A little bit of the context, and I was also very interested in like using these bodily techniques of Qi Gong in order to become aware of the atmosphere, as you said. Of the processuality of it, because it's basically, I mean, it's this feeling or sensing of some kind of energy is basically also generated by our body, right? If we focus and like we can also see that in meditation and other body practices, if we focus on certain processes in our body, the blood flow in these parts of our body changes, so we just might also generate more heat in certain parts of our body if we start to pay attention to them. And I think this interplay of where we put our attention to, and if we allow certain processes just to unfold in our engagement with the atmosphere that surrounds us, that we can gain like a different kind of sensitivity also.
I think I wanted just to add something. I wasn't completely satisfied with the Qi Gong experience, or I thought there were some blind spots, and that was why you mentioned at the beginning of the talk this idea of documentality. That is this idea from this Italian philosopher who talked about the social existence of thing need to be mediated, need to be recorded, need to be written down somehow. As long as it isn't recorded, as long as we do not have document that we can share, as long as it doesn't pass through these kind of techniques, it doesn't exist socially. I mean, it can exist like physically, bodily, as the atmosphere exists beyond our documentality, but still it tends to be absent from the social stage. That was why I found that experience of Qi Gong and so important that I wanted to end up with this thing, and I wanted to rephrase everything I said before as Qi Gong cinema or Qi Gong visual art. But at the same time, I was looking for something else that could fit also in a documental, even if it's really thin and it's really empirical and it's really sensible, etc., etc. But it could also be spent in the documental frame somehow.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think that's a really good, interesting point too, that brings it again to consideration of these sort of social contexts and social systems, which kind of has to consider these other ways of knowing others, these kind of knowledge practices that are, effective and material that don't get documented or recorded. But I think this notion of using the sort of one's body as a medium, and that changes our consciousness, changes our awareness, it also changes our sociality in some way. And I don't know if that there's a sort of, if that again can be recorded in the same way that these other mediums leave and kind of imprint that is legible by somebody else, right? I mean, the idea of a medium is that it disseminates something as well, right? So I think some of these experiences that you're describing are not really something that can be shared or transferred to somebody else without them experiencing the same kind of thing. So how do you communicate about this? How do you share or disseminate that kind of knowledge that's produced in these effective ways?
Well, that's a problem.
And maybe we make this also the last question. Sorry, because I know we're running late a little bit. So thanks, Rosa, to remind us that we're sort of at the end of the talk. But yeah, thanks for taking that last question.
Do you want me to react to end?
Yes, please.
Okay, I think that I'm not an expert of physical technique, so for me it's a blind spot. It's a problem. What I can say is what I saw with in particular with this fellow scholar who's working on this kind of techniques, and the best way to share and to be a medium in a sense of transmission of it. It's not about describing it through word. It's not about filming it somehow, but training. I mean, it is a matter of practicing and training. So the point is not, it's to take the other to feel the same thing. So to set up protocol or gesture and take the time and space to train it and experience it directly, each person, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you so much for this presentation and this sort of really inspiring talk. I've shared the video references that you mentioned in the chat, if anybody wants to see. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing all that. Thank you all for participating in this discussion. I'm going to give it over to Raza. And thanks so much, Raza, for putting together all the conference today and bringing us here.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. So this was a really amazing day, and I'm happy that also, I think I've got already so much inspiration. I hope this day was for everybody really useful and exciting. Okay, thank you. So we are meeting in 40 minutes. We are meeting in Rixi Gallery. So we will be again providing a Zoom live stream from the exhibition opening in 40 minutes. And also it will be followed by some video films, also streamed live in both YouTube channel and Zoom from our atmospheric forest installation. And we meet tomorrow at 10 o'clock Riga time in Zoom again. Okay, thank you, everybody. Bye.